The following is a BATV production, made with the equipment that is available to residents of our cable viewing area. To learn more about television production and the equipment that is available to you, please visit www.mybatv.com.
Okay, because everybody naturally just quieted down, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Erin Reed, and I'm the Assistant Principal of Student Support here at Batavia High School. And I'd like to start off by thanking everyone for being here this evening. We know that the topic of substance use and abuse is a difficult one to have with your families, but we also know that knowledge is one of the best avenues toward prevention of substance use or abuse. So it's our hope that after listening to our wonderful panel of speakers this evening, that you'll be armed with the knowledge and the resources available in our community to keep our families safe and healthy. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest speakers this evening. First, we have Batavia Deputy Fire Chief Banker, Batavia Police Officer Matt White, Kane County Coroner Rob Russell, the Executive Director of Breaking Free, Mike Moran, the President of LTM Heroin Awareness Foundation, that's a mouthful, Kristen Gutierrez, and Rick Hertz will be one of our last speakers. So if everybody could give them a round of applause. Without their knowledge, experience, and willingness to come up to speak tonight, we wouldn't be able to do something so important. So from the Batavia High School Administration and District, we thank you very much for being here, and I'm going to pass the mic over to Chief Banker.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to be here. By no means am I standing up here and going to pretend I'm an expert, because I'm not. As we go through the night, you'll see who the experts are, and their information is going to be far more important than what I have to say. You're probably wondering why the fire department's here. The least thing that we do in the fire service is fight fires. The number one thing we do is go on ambulance calls, medical calls, all day, every day, even in Batavia. The second reason I'm here, I'm a parent. I'm a Batavia resident. All four of my children went through the Batavia school systems. I can't see who's out there, but my kids may have been friends with yours. So with Ms. Reed, I'm very passionate about this. I'm very passionate about drugs. I'm very passionate about overdoses. I'm very passionate about suicides. It's a problem. It's here, and we need to be aware of it. So I'm just going to give a few statistics, and then I'm going to move on and let the experts talk to you. Because of HIPAA and patient confidentiality, I can't break down statistics, but I can give you a little bit of statistics. This year, 2013, in Batavia alone, we're going to have approximately over 100 overdoses. Not all from heroin, but overdoses. That's up from 78 last year. One of the things that we see, Matt, you'll see in the corner, is one of the things we see with these type of things, especially with high school students, is it's not just a party with Batavia kids. It's not just party with Geneva kids. You'll see, we'll go to an incident or whatever, and you may see kids from Batavia, Geneva, St. Charles, Elburn, Glenelg, and Lombard. Why I'm saying that's important, and why you're going to understand why that's important as we go on here. But just in the Tri-Cities, just to the Tri-Cities up to date, there's been 140 overdoses this year. That's significant. That's a lot of overdoses. Not all heroin, but overdoses. I was recently at a conference, and one of the things they talked about, and they're going to talk about it here some more, is DuPage County is experiencing about 1 death a week from heroin. I'm trying to hold back. I get very passionate. Ms. Reed and I talk about this all the time. I could talk all night about this. So I have to refrain from moving on and going to where I want to go. But it's very important. It is in Batavia. We have drugs in Batavia. We have overdoses in Batavia. It's here. I'm glad to see people are here and they're willing to come out and learn about it. Our last heroin overdose was last week in Batavia. I don't know what else to say. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're willing to listen, and I thank you for coming. So I would like to introduce Batavia Police Officer Matt White.
Good evening. My name is Matt White. I'm a Batavia police officer, and I'm currently assigned to the Batavia High School as the school resource officer. This is my first year in the school, and it is an eye-opener. I would first like to share a personal story with you about how heroin has touched my life. In 2001, my brother was a 23-year-old at that time, and he died of a heroin overdose. We were both raised in the same manner, sports. So I became a police officer, and my brother died at the age of 23. So that just shows how heroin does not discriminate. Current trends in the city of Batavia. The Batavia Police Department, thankfully, is not currently seeing an upward trend in 911 calls, or we're not finding a lot of heroin on people on traffic stops or as we're making contact with people in the city. But as the Deputy Fire Chief, Randy Banker, stated, we are seeing overdoses in the city in a higher number. And as he said, we did have one last week where we did have a fatality. The Batavia Police Department is aware that it exists in our community, just as it does in every other community across the United States. The Batavia Police is asking the community to help out with this. The community is the most important tool and resource to the police department. You are the eyes and ears of the communities. Geneva, St. Charles, Batavia, Elburn, you guys are the eyes and ears. If you see suspicious activity in your neighborhood, please call 911 because we are here to help. An example of suspicious activity, and most common, would be you're at your home and you see many cars pulling up to the same house over and over again. That would be considered suspicious. You see somebody coming out of the house, meeting with the driver or passenger of that car for 1 to 2 minutes and then going back in the house, and that same thing is repeated over and over again. That would be a reason to call the police department, and that would be something that we can watch and try and prevent our communities from being overwhelmed by this horrible drug or any drugs. Some of the resources that the Batavia Police Department can offer, or many other police departments, it's assisted individual development, otherwise known as victim services. Unfortunately, in police work, we usually respond to something when there's already been a tragedy, where something has already happened. This is an organization that we would call for the victim or the parents or whoever it might be, and they would be able to direct you towards counseling or any other help that the family might need. That would be a number that we can provide. For children and kids, high school age, obviously they have school counselors, they have social workers, those would be provided to them in the schools. And to close, as I said, call the police. We provide prevention, and then we can provide resources to solve the problem. Most importantly, this drug causes immediate addiction. My brother was one of those people. Approximately 18 months from when he started using, he was dead. And thank you.
See if I can get this to stand. There we go. Good evening. My name is Rob Russell. I'm the Kane County Coroner. Back last November, I was elected to the post. Prior to that, I was a DuPage County Sergeant. I worked for the DuPage County Sheriff's Office for approximately 20 years. So I'm not new to the beast that I'll call heroin. I've seen what it can do, but the new thing that I'm really seeing that's hitting me it's hitting me directly in the face is the fact of what this animal can do to a family, to an individual, to a whole community. I've seen the beast, and more importantly, the worst case results of what can happen. Last year, in 2012, we had 27 heroin deaths. This year, we've had 14 so far. We have some that are pending. We know will probably wind up being heroin deaths. Of all of the different types of deaths that occur, overdose deaths that occur, heroin-related deaths are almost 50%. And that is a significant number because there are a lot of different drugs out there, as you all know. When we conduct a death investigation, some common things that we hear from parents and loved ones are the following. We didn't know. We knew that he or she had some issues, but we thought he or she was doing better. He or she was in rehab, but must have had a relapse. The reason that's significant is because many times when people go through this challenge of addiction, they go back, they try to clean up their life, and they go through rehab and whatnot, but many times when they have relapses, they'll go back to using the same amount that they left off with, and that in some instances will result in a fatality because they think they can take as much as they did, but not so. If your goal, and some of you in here, I hope all of your goal is this, is to not end up in my office, do not start using heroin. If you make a mistake and do, it's a long, hard road back. Please, 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 your coroner is begging you, do not go down this road. I don't want to have to tell your loved ones that you're dead. One last thing, please like my office's Facebook page. It's Kane County Coroner's Office. If you look into the search thing under the pages, we have a lot of great information on our Facebook page. We don't have anything gory or anything. We're very professional with it, and there's a lot of great information, and we tap into a lot of different organizations and advocacy groups, and we try to spread the word around to keep people healthy and alive. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Moran, and I am the Executive Director at Breaking Free. So I'm here to add to the professional perspective. As an agency, we provide substance abuse treatment, substance abuse prevention, and child abuse prevention services. I've been, quote, working in the field of treatment and prevention since 1981, so for quite some time. But I'll start by saying I'm really honored to be here tonight. I'm really honored to be a part of this panel and to be able to speak with you about a problem that is occurring really everywhere here, certainly in the Chicago metropolitan area. But also I think we're honored by your presence, because oftentimes people aren't necessarily sure if they need to come to an event like this. And so the fact that you've taken time out of your schedules to be here tonight and to be part of this discussion, I think is really something that feels good to me. So thank you for being here. What I'm supposed to do is really talk about 5 main topics. So quickly, I'll walk you through a perspective on what happens as people go from a period of no use to some use to abuse to dependence, how that happens for folks to any substance. And then I'm going to talk specifically a little bit about what we call opiates. Heroin is an opiate, and so I'll talk briefly about opiates. There's other opiates out there as well, which you're probably aware of. And for parents in the audience, talk about what we call signs and symptoms. If this is what these substances do, what would I see? What would I hear? What would it look like that might tell me that I want to look a little bit further at this out of concern for my son or my daughter? As a follow-up to that, talk a little bit about, if you are concerned, what is it a parent could do and should do, and close with some resources that are available. There's a couple of speakers who will follow me who will do a very nice job of talking from a personal perspective as well, so I'm excited to get the program over to them. With that in mind, part of what I always try to share with folks is that from an addiction perspective, from a no use, abuse, dependence perspective, how does that happen? Well, it happens because all of us, our brains have pleasure centers, and there are certain substances that activate the pleasure centers of our brain. And those substances make us feel good, And typically, most people, they do something that helps us feel good, we tend to repeat that. And so that's part of what happens. People start out with not having a problem, and this isn't just with opiates, but with any substance. And first-time use is experimental use, non-problematic use, but as people become more wrapped up in it, something changes in the brain. We talk about addiction as being a brain disease because repeated exposure to the substance changes how our brain and our body responds and adapts to that substance. And that's not just with respect to opiates, it's with respect to all mood-altering substances. Alcohol, nicotine, cocaine, stimulants, marijuana, cigarettes. There's many, many substances that act in a similar fashion. Some are quicker to have those effects. Some take a little bit longer to have those effects. And that's one of the things that's different about opiate use. It's also important to recognize, I think, and we see this from a treatment perspective, is that generally, ultimately, if people come to treatment, they do have a drug or drugs of choice. It's rare for people to begin to use heroin or other opiates as their first-time drug of choice. People tend to start with some other substances, and over time, as they experience, they get more involved with other substances, ultimately potentially leading to the use of opiates. Opiate is one of the substances, it's a class of substances that has one of the highest abuse potentials that we know of. And so opiate use, and opiates are things not only like heroin, but you may know of it as things like Percocet and Vicodin and codeine and Norcos and morphine and OxyContin and opium and heroin and methadone. And some of you may have heard even recently there's been information about, quote, this new drug, slang name called crocodile, but it's desomorphine, which was historically known over in Europe, now appears to be making it present in the U.S. It's an opiate. It's synthesized from morphine, and it's recently made an appearance here. All those substances fall into the opiate category of substances. And because of that, they really do two things when we take them. Actually, they do three things. So I'll first repeat. They activate very strongly the pleasure centers of our brain. And so they're very, very reinforcing because they feel very, 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 very good. And we like to do things that make us feel good. They also have sedating properties. And so what does that mean? Well, it slows us down. It slows down our central nervous system. So it slows down things like pulse and heart rate and respiration and response time, etc. And so we become very sedated, very lethargic. We become sort of very slow compared to how we would normally be. And it also has what are called analgesic properties, which means they're painkillers. And so they both deaden the sensation of pain, and in so doing, they increase the sense of euphoria for people who are using it. So it's a substance that ultimately slows us down, helps us feel very, very good, which triggers a cycle of repeated use to chase that good feeling. It floods the brain. It's very effective at doing that. As I said before, it has what's called the high abuse potential. And really what we describe to folks is that there's progressions. People go from no use to abuse to addiction. There's progressions. People start out being able to voluntarily make choices about using substances. Heroin is extremely effective at hijacking the brain. And so while early on it's a matter of choice, over the course of the addiction developing, it moves from choice to a compulsion. You no longer have the choice to use or not to use. In fact, when you're not using, you feel very, very bad. You feel terrible, you feel crappy, you feel all the other words that you could attach to that, which means you're very strongly compelled to use the substance again. You cannot choose it. It's chosen you. You've developed the dependence in your system. And heroin is such a high abuse potential, as do the other opiates, that it can happen very rapidly. We see a progression in how people use it because it's not uncommon. Many of those substances are used initially as medicines, and so they may be taken orally. And so opiates are swallowed. As people begin to chase a better high, it may then be crushed, it may be snorted, it may be smoked, it may be injected, all of which is an indication of the progression about how compelled the person is to get this substance to activate the pleasure centers of the brain. We then begin to chase that experience. So it's a scary substance. It has a high abuse potential. It can happen very rapidly. How would you know? In terms of symptoms, I can talk with you really from two different perspectives. sedatives. Physical symptoms are really related to the properties of the substance itself. Again, it's a sedative, it's a sedating substance, so it slows people down. People become very lethargic, very withdrawn. Users will talk about the nod. When they use, they feel very good, but they're almost lifeless. They don't really need to do anything, but just to feel the euphoria and really be uninvolved with everything else that's happening around them. It constricts the pupils, and so, as all of you know, your pupils will either expand or contract in response to the light that's available. Opiates will constrict the pupils, which means they're always pinpoint. So when they should be wide, they're going to be very closed. If you're outside, they may be supposed to be closed because of lighting conditions, but heroin users, opiate users always have constricted pinpoint pupils, and oftentimes folks will try to mask that by keeping their eyes hidden. And so sunglasses and wearing sunglasses at times that seem to be inappropriate, you might say, I wonder what that's about. I will warn you or caution you that as I talk about these symptoms, what I will tell you shortly is that one symptom doesn't mean there's a problem. So we're going to end up looking for clusters of things. But constricted or pinpoint pupils is one of the indicators. Also, dark circles develop under the eyes. Many addicts or alcoholics will have problems with nutrition, but one of the things that seems to be prominent is dark circles that develop under the eyes for opiate users. People's voices under the influence tend to be slowed down, and so users will talk in a tone that's both very slow and very low. They talk deeper than normal, they talk slower than normal, and it's noticeable to people who know them when they're not under the influence. Something that we don't typically talk about in polite company, but it slows down, it messes with people's gastrointestinal system, so constipation, unfortunately, is a very common problem with opiate addiction, with opiate dependence. Also weight loss, and somehow cigarette smoking seems to be pretty correlated with opiate use, and so there's lots of people who either may have not been a cigarette smoker or were a smoker before, but they really are increasing their use of nicotine, particularly smoking cigarettes. That seems to be correlated with their use of heroin as well. If they're injecting, you can certainly see things like needle marks and needle tracks, etc. There may be infections or abscesses at those sites, but people tend to try to keep those hidden. So injection sites are obviously not in places that would be most obvious. If they're snorting it, then you're going to see irritation of the nose. The nose might be runny, red, it appears irritated, those sorts of things. That can also be because of allergies, etc. But those are the things that we would look at in terms of trying to look for physical signs of opiate use. Depending on where you see the person in the use cycle, there is lethargy and withdrawal during right following the use. As people approach withdrawal, they're going to become more irritated, more edgy, and so you could see somebody who looks very different in 6-8 hours after their last use as they begin to crave their next use. Behaviorally, what I tell parents to look for is, unfortunately, part of what happens is that heroin use, opiate use is expensive, and so people begin to have to get more and more money. So missing items, stolen items, either from home or from elsewhere that people have been at, is oftentimes, unfortunately, an indicator that something's happening to get the money to acquire their heroin in particular. And that may also include medication that's missing. As parents or family members, we may have opiates in our medicine cabinets that were for medicinal use, and suddenly you're wondering what happened to all of those because they were there a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks ago, and now they're missing from the medicine cabinet. So we encourage folks to keep their eyes on that. It's more available than it used to be, but for many people, acquiring heroin means going into the city, and so you'll hear people talk about what is called the heroin highway, 88 into the Eisenhower, into the west side of the city. And so if your son or daughter has access to a car, I always tell folks, be aware of the mileage. If the mileage seems out of ordinary, where are they going during those hours? Because it's a sedative, people can become incredibly sleepy, but at times that it doesn't make sense. Many of us are sleepy at night, in the morning, but middle of the day, right before they go out in the evening, people appear sleepy at times that don't seem to make sense compared to the way the rest of us experience feeling sleepy, lethargic, etc. And then we also talk about change in people's friends or peer groups. With any substance using pattern, people tend to move from people who are not using to people who are just like them. And so if you see a change in who your son or daughter is being with, then that might be an indication that there's some change in what they're doing with those people as well. If you end up being concerned as a parent, and let me back up one step, I think as a parent the challenge is that I don't think it's changed any. Our youngest is soon to be 21, our oldest is 30 now, but neither one of them came home with an owner's manual. And so as parents, we sometimes don't know for sure how to put all the things together. What should we do? What's the right thing to do? What I tell parents to do is a couple of things that seem very basic. It doesn't matter how old your son or daughter is. And for the young people in the room, I'm sorry that I'm talking mostly to your parents, but you're not supposed to know these parenting tips, so don't tell your friends. But know who your child is hanging with, know who their friends are, know who their friends' families are, and know what those families' expectations are in terms of beliefs about alcohol and other substance use. As parents, we need to establish and convey clear expectations about what we want our sons or daughters to do. We have this belief that we have no influence over our son or daughter the older they get. The reality is that we have much more of the ability to influence them than we like to give ourselves credit for. So it can be something as simple as having the conversation, say, here's what we expect from you. These are our family rules, these are our expectations, etc. Be awake and be involved. It's easy in elementary school to be really involved, in middle school less involved, high school even less involved, but stay as involved as you can, but if nothing else, be awake and be up when your son or daughter comes home so that you can see what's happening, how do they look, how do they act, those sorts of things. And as I said earlier, and look for patterns. One thing doesn't mean it's problematic, but 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 says, okay, now we're seeing some themes here, now we're seeing some patterns that may suggest that we should take further action. Parents, ultimately, I think we need to trust our radars. Sometimes something is said or done that just doesn't sit right with us. And so we have to listen to ourselves and do some more investigation. We may be wrong, and that's okay. We may be right, and it's really important to know that we were right and then what we're going to do. And that's really what I need to close with is, so what do we encourage you to do? Should you be concerned? Well, it's important to know that addiction to any substance, while it's a difficult challenge, treatment and recovery happen. Recovery happens to people all the time. They don't have to go into treatment, but treatment's available. And in recent years, for heroin use, there's been some advances in treatment with medication that have made it even more effective. So treatment is available, but you won't know what to do unless you seek someone who has some expertise in this area. So what we tell people is make sure you talk with a specialist, make sure that there's an evaluation conducted, and what I tell people is that the evaluation should always include a urine screen, because people will say one thing and the urine says something different, and we like to have both stories as part of our evaluation. I work for Breaking Free. We have specialized outpatient programs, including a Suboxone program for opiate addicts, so certainly you could reach us. Our number is 630-897-1003, but I'll put some brochures out. But there's other resources. The Gateway Foundation in Aurora also provides inpatient and outpatient treatment. Ren's Addiction Counseling Center in Elgin and St. Charles provides outpatient services. Hearts of Hope is a foundation based in Geneva that does a lot of work in this area. And then one that was newer to me, but I'm pleased that they're here tonight, the LTM Heroin Awareness and Support Foundation is another resource as well. So there's resources out here. They're available in lots of ways. Certainly the staff here at Batavia know what those are. I'm excited because Kristen, who's with LTM Heroin Awareness and Support Foundation, is going to follow me now. And so she's a great speaker. Thank you for your time and attention, and happy to join the conversation.
Hi. Thank you, Principal Joanne Smith and Dean Aaron Reed, for inviting LTM today. I applaud District 101 for acknowledging that there is a heroin epidemic in our backyard, and by being ashamed of it and afraid of it only allows for it to continue. After the presentation, LTM's guest speaker, Rick Hertz, will share his story as a recovering addict, and then we'll ask questions. Hopefully you could ask questions, and the panel will do our best to answer. My name is Kristen Gutierrez. I have a daughter and a nephew who currently attend Batavia High School. I've lived in this community for almost 15 years. And I have a son, 2 nieces and 2 nephews that recently graduated. I have a vested interest in this community and the health and the safety of our kids. Heroin entered my life in 2010 when I found out both of my brothers were using. Louis and Vinny started probably the early parts of 2010. At first, it was like an out-of-body experience. I was like, really? That's so terrible. I felt so bad for them, for my dad, for my stepmom. But I also felt somewhat detached because I was completely ignorant on heroin's power or the role it would forever play in my life. You may think you know drugs, but heroin is different. After an excruciating intervention, my brother Louis finally agreed to a 14-month rehab program. But he was taken over by false confidence and he checked out in 4 months. 4 weeks later, on August 7th, 2012, he died of an overdose. The LTM Foundation was established by my family in the wake of his 2012 death. Our hope is to reach teens and young adults before heroin does. We want to use the power of education to shine a light on this evil drug, heroin. So please like us on Facebook and stay connected. Heroin addicts didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, let me try that heroin everyone is talking about. It usually starts with prescription drug abuse, specifically opiate prescription drug abuse. And then when it gets too hard or too expensive, they resort to heroin for a cheaper, easier accessible high. Prescription drug abuse is the gateway to heroin, especially Oxycontin. Once graduated to heroin, there's a period at the beginning where people drift in and out of use. This is heroin romancing you. The pattern may be something like this. This is something I do on Saturday. This is something I do on the weekends now. Let me add Friday into the mix, and then Thursday for a 4-day weekend. And then before you know it, it slips into full-blown addiction. But there are also people that try heroin one time and instantly say, this is the drug I've been looking for. But acquiring it on a regular basis initially makes it tougher to jump into regular use, but it's not impossible. The same with pills, actually. If you can only get them hit or miss, you'd probably be dabbling at the beginning until you found a steady source. But if you have a family member or a friend with a reliable supply in their medicine cabinet, you would progress to addiction much quicker. And when that source runs out, many resort to heroin, which is cheaper and easier to get. Once you're addicted to heroin, snorting $10 a day increases to injecting $150 a day, and your daily focus becomes, how can I get money for heroin, and where can I get heroin? That is it. You become its slave, you die, or you dedicate yourself to recovery. When do you know that you're addicted? When you hit a point of physical dependency or even behavioral reliance and it feels like you have no choice in the matter, this is addiction. In abuse, you make bad judgments, but you're making the judgment. Your brain chemistry is normal. You don't completely lose control, and as the consequences start to pile up, you stop. Addiction is a disease. Abnormal brain chemistry occurs. You completely lose control of your life, and you're unable to stop because of consequences, no matter how dire they are. Heroin addiction is not a simple matter of choice, it is a disease. And like other chronic diseases, without treatment and constant engagement in recovery activities, addiction is progressive and it will lead to disability or premature death. A user's environment reinforces addictive behavior. It creates triggers that subliminally make the addict want to use. That's why changing people, places, and things is critical to an addict's recovery. There's receptors in the brain that are genetically coded to crave heroin. It hijacks your prefrontal cortex, where your judgment and your decision-making sits. And heroin's now pulling the strings. You have no choice in the matter. Withdrawal from heroin is frightening and it's painful, and it typically happens a couple hours after its use. That's why you have to continue to be using more and more heroin just to feel normal. Rehab and following the treatment team's recommendation can save your life. Addiction is a persistent disease that requires constant vigilance to sustain recovery. That means recovery for the rest of your life, which includes abstinence from all mood-altering chemicals like alcohol, marijuana, or other opiates. As a recovering addict, you can no longer go out with your buddies and go to Buffalo Wild Wings, have a beer and some wings. You lost that card. You can't go to a club with your friends when you're 22, 23 years old. You can't. Louis was one of 43 people in DuPage County who died of heroin overdose in 2012. The 2013 DuPage County health toll is hitting a record pace with one death every 8 days. The state's attorney, Bob Berlin, warns that they have a heroin epidemic in that county, where Kane County's overdose deaths in 2012 more than doubled from 2011. These are sobering facts. But my brother was more than just a number. He was a beautiful person. He had his whole life in front of him, and heroin stole it away. He went to his last rehab, Teen Challenge, and he found a deep relationship with God. He was feeling so good about himself. He wanted to get home and live a normal life. But then he started to slip into old behaviors. He drank on the weekends, and he started smoking pot again. It only took 4 weeks for heroin to slither back into his life and take him. It saw that he was weak, and it attacked. As a recovering addict, you cannot just pick up where you left off. Living recovery is your new normal. Going to NA meetings, having a sponsor, abstaining from all mood-altering chemicals will allow for you to live. Be bold and stand up to heroin. Being ashamed and afraid allows heroin and its epidemic to continue. It thrives in the shadows. Heroin is a scrounge, and it takes everything from you and gives you nothing back in return. Heroin will destroy your family. It will make you lie, steal, abandon all of your morals. The reality is that if you use heroin, you will die prematurely, or you will dedicate yourself to recovery. Both of these outcomes have a price that your family will pay in despair, fear, loss, and money. My family has both crosses to bear. Louis will never come back. He is forever gone. My brother's rehab cost their parents tens of thousands of dollars. This is what heroin brings to the table. I thank God every day that Vinny is fighting and he's dedicating himself to recovery in Philadelphia. If heroin crosses your path, run like hell and don't look back. Thank you for taking the time to get educated. Now, I'd like to introduce the courageous Ricky Hertz as he shares with us his battle with heroin addiction.
Good evening. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. My name's Richard Hertz. I'm here to tell you my story. Hopefully it will touch at least one person here tonight. We could prevent another tragic loss. It all started about 11 years ago in the summer between my junior and senior year of high school. I was your regular high school kid with halfway decent grades. I played sports, and I smoked pot and liked to party like many high schoolers going into their senior years. But my partying started to get harder. I started going to raves and underground clubs. I tried ecstasy and cocaine, and I didn't stop there. At the time, there was a club drug called Special K going around at these raves. A neighbor of my friend told us that he had it and was selling it to us for about 2 months. I eventually went to a house party. I gave it to a friend there who asked if he could try it, and he told me that it was in fact heroin. I was not happy about it. At this point, I vowed to never touch it again, but after 2 days of experiencing my first withdrawal symptoms, I called the kid who tricked me into supporting his habit by paying double, just so that I can get high again. The hook was set and I was already reeled in. It all went downhill from there. At this time, I was back in school. I had already began to let my grades fall. I was ditching my last 2 or 3 classes every day just so that I can beat the traffic on 290 to get to the city so that I can get high again. I was putting myself in dangerous situations every day, not just by using, but by driving into the ghetto, taking the risks of getting shot at, carjacked, mugged, or arrested. Someone was watching out for me. This went on for about 6 or 7 months before my parents knew something was wrong. I was hiding all truancy letters sent from the school from my mom. She had no idea I was skipping classes. Eventually, she found out and started waiting for me in the dean's office and in the school parking lot. But I had people watching her too. So when she would leave to get coffee or go to the washroom or go back to work, I knew about it and I was out the door without looking back. That summer after school got out, I didn't graduate on time, and I didn't get to walk the stage with my friends. Instead, I went on to an outpatient rehab program every single day. After 2 weeks of pretending that I wanted to be clean, I used again and was kicked out of rehab. I then went to summer school to pass my last class and got my diploma all while I was still using, but my parents knew that I needed to pass that class. When I was done, I was checked into a 30-day inpatient program. I stayed 2 weeks, snuck out one night, I got high, I got caught, I failed another drug test, and I was kicked out of rehab again. It was like a never-ending cycle. I was lying, cheating, stealing, not just from my family, from my friends and their families too. I eventually lost everything, and I mean everything. My family and friends wanted nothing to do with me. I lost any job that I can get. I crashed any car that my grandpa let me drive, and I just had nothing left except for heroin. I ended up getting kicked out of my house with nowhere to go. I slept in a house that was under construction for 2 weeks without anyone knowing where I was or what I was doing. I stole my dad's tools, my mom's jewelry, my cash from my little sister, and my little brother's video games. My friends cut me off completely too. I stole money out of my best friend's mom's purse. How low can you get? My parents had finally let me back into the house, but they had already planned a vacation, and they knew they couldn't leave me home alone, otherwise everything would be gone. So on March 27th, 2004, I shot my last bag of heroin in the bathroom at O'Hare Airport right before the security check. I spent a week on a cruise ship with nothing to get me through withdrawals but a leave and beer. By the time I got home, all phone numbers associated with drugs were deleted from my phone, and my number was changed. I had made a promise to myself that after what I had just endured on that ship, all alone, that this was the end, and I wouldn't touch heroin again. And with the help of my family and my true friends, who I love and thank all so much, and who eventually took me back in and trusted me again, I made it out the other side alive. I got a job, and I got my life together. And then out of nowhere, after having almost 3 years clean, I had a bad breakup with a girlfriend, and a bad few weeks after that I resorted back to my addiction and I relapsed. After all that I had lost and all I had to endure, I still turned back to heroin. Everything in my mind told me that drugs were the wrong way to go, but my addiction overruled any logical thinking. That's how strong this drug is. My relapse was short-lived, and after a month I was back on track to being sober. And that brings us to today. I stand in front of you with 6 years and 6 months clean and sober from heroin. But there is no amount of time that you can be clean. It's always going to be there. You can never be 100% safe from your addiction after you've started. It's always there and it always will be there. But you can be stronger than it and you can prevent it. Like cancer and diabetes, treatment and recovery options are available, which makes it possible to live a life without heroin, an option for me. But you have to ask for and want the help from the people closest to you. We're all here with a plan. We all want to help prevent this addiction from starting in the first place. All you need to do is ask for help. Please let us help you become a success story like me. I'd like to take my last minute to thank Batavia High School and your community for allowing us to be here to speak to you tonight. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I do applaud you for being here and taking the time to educate yourself. I would like to think that maybe if I had the opportunity to do that, my life would have been different. My name is Felicia Maselli, and my son, Louis, died of an overdose in 2012, and I just wanted to read you a poem about heroin. Hello, my name is heroin. I destroy homes, tear families apart, take your children, and that's just the start. I'm more costly than diamonds, more costly than gold. The sorrow I bring is a sight to behold. And if you need me, remember, I'm easily found. I live all around you, in schools and in town. I live with the rich, I live with the poor, I live down the street and maybe next door. My power is awesome, try me, you'll see. But if you do, you may never break free. Just try me once and I might let you go, but try me twice and I'll own your soul. When I possess you, you'll steal and you'll lie. You do what you have to do just to get high. The crimes you commit from my narcotic charms will be worth the pleasures you feel in my arms. You'll lie to your mother, you'll steal from your dad. When you see their tears, you should feel sad. But you'll forget your morals and how you were raised. I'll be your conscience. I'll teach you my ways. I take kids from parents and parents from kids. I turn people from God and separate friends. I'll take everything from you, your looks and your pride. I'll be with you always, right by your side. You'll give up everything, your family, your home, your friends, your money, then you'll be alone. I'll take and I'll take till you have nothing more to give. When I'm finished with you, you'll be lucky to live. If you try me, be warned, this is no game. If given the chance, I'll drive you insane. I'll ravish your body, I'll control your mind. I'll own you completely, your soul will be mine. The nightmares I give you while lying in bed, the voices you'll hear from inside your head, the sweats, the shakes, the visions you'll see, I want you to know these are all gifts from me. But then it's too late and you know in your heart that you are mine and we shall not part. You'll regret that you tried me, they always do, but you came to me, not I to you. You knew this would happen, many times you were told, but you challenged my power and choose to be bold. You could have said no and just walked away. If you could live that day over, now what would you say? I'll be your master, you'll be my slave. I'll even go with you when you go to your grave. Now that you have met me, what will you do? Will you try me or not? It's all up to you. I can bring you more misery than words can tell. Come take my hand, let me lead you to hell. Author unknown. And I would just like to ask that when you guys leave here, you talk to at least like 3 people about what you learned today. Don't be silent and don't be ashamed. And you know, it's prevalent in our community, so maybe you can help someone by just sharing the information that you learned tonight. So thank you.
Okay, so we will have a question and answer session. I'll actually come down here, so if you have questions, we just ask that you speak into the mic so that everyone can hear you, and then the panel will answer. So come on down right to the front if you have questions. Right, it's hard to be the first one.
Found one.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for all your presentations. What do you think the reason or reasons are behind these sudden, very fast rise that you just referred to with the statistics? What's driving it, do you think?
I believe what's driving is that the kids that are experimenting with heroin are not educated in the fact that, are we okay? Okay. Are not educated in the fact that heroin is so deadly and so dangerous. They think that they're just trying a new drug. So the whole premise of our foundation and everyone sitting here is to start the conversation and educate our kids that this is not something that you can idly or casually use. It will kill you.
And I would add that one of the things we've seen in recent years is the purity of heroin has gotten to be much better than previously. When I first started working many years ago, opiate addicts were tended to be older, middle-aged addicts. It was more of a urban and particularly Chicago thing. And in recent years, as quote the product, because heroin is part of the drug trade and the goal of the dealer is to make money, the product has gotten better. And unfortunately, that means that people are getting addicted quicker and also younger. They tend to think that if I'm not injecting it, I'm not an addict. But your brain doesn't know how it got there. Once it gets there, all it knows is that felt really good. So there's a better quality product on the street that is getting people addicted quicker as well.
And I'll add one thing else to that. As far as the police end of it, these parties that kids go to nowadays, as we've talked about, people from all over communities come to these parties. And I know in my brother's instance, it took one person to introduce that drug to the party, and one or two people take it and they tell the next person about it. I think that's another reason why it becomes so prevalent. I don't know, people are just aren't afraid of it. I don't understand that.
I've also heard some of the other forums that I've been going to, a recovering addict told me that heroin is cheaper than cigarettes and more accessible than alcohol. So that's another reason.
I actually have a couple of questions. The first one is this presentation available to the students? And the second question is, I know you mentioned that you can buy heroin in the city. Is there anywhere locally in Batavia that it's being sold that I as a parent can be aware of, that you know of?
The Batavia Police Department is not aware of any current location where it's being sold. It is traveling through our community, we know that. There have been arrests made where traffic stops have been made where people have had it on them. Not from this community, but they've passed through, so we know it comes through. Now, it's small amounts that we're finding. We're not finding large amounts of heroin on these people, which tells me that they've gone out to the west side of Chicago and scored their dope and have brought it back to where they're going to use. So, yeah, to answer your question, I don't know of any place in the community here where we actually have a drug house.
And to answer your first question, sorry, at this point BATV is taping us right now, so it will air on BATV, and we are going to work with our partners to figure out what is the best way to introduce this to our students.
As you mentioned, you didn't go out and just look for heroin. I think you called it Special K. And I would imagine, do the kids actually know, at a party, do they know it's heroin? Or is there something else that's being called right now?
Well, when I started, I was going to raves, and there was an actual drug called Special K, which is it's a cat tranquilizer from veterinary clinics. It's called ketamine. And that was what I thought we were doing. It was a club drug. It kind of zones you out, almost like heroin does. And that's what I thought we were buying. But it turned out that we weren't buying Special K. We were buying heroin to support my friend's neighbor's habit. So there's other things that heroin does go by. They call it blows, foils, tins, as it comes wrapped in foil or aluminum foil or tins. Special K is a totally different drug, so that's what we thought we were doing.
So they were tricked you?
Yes, I was tricked into using heroin.
Hi, I'm not going to ask a question. I was just going to comment. I'm a nurse who works in the community with a lot of doctors who treat addiction. And the question was asked earlier about where do they get it and how does that happen? What I hear a lot is that it starts with prescription pain pills. And I just like to remind people that Vicodin is the #1 prescribed drug in this country, twice as much as the second prescribed drug. So there's a lot of prescription drug abuse out there, and that's kind of where I hear a lot of times it starts. So something else to think about, just as a reminder.
Yeah, watch your medicine cabinet.
Well, like I said earlier, our overall overdoses are going very high, and that's exactly right. It's not just heroin.
Is it true that it can also be laced in marijuana? I've heard that rumor. I don't know if it's rumor or if it's true that kids think they're just smoking marijuana and that it's laced with heroin.
It can be. There's people will lace marijuana. You can get heroin, you can get cocaine, you can get other things laced. So the earlier question about other drugs that are out there, there's two pieces that we know is that there is no quality control, which means what you think you're getting isn't necessarily what you are getting. And profit is oftentimes the motive. So things can be cut with other substances. You may think it's this when it's really that. People are oftentimes chasing a better high. So if you're going to lace a joint with some heroin or some coke or something else, it's because you're wanting to get that combo high. So there's all kinds of combinations that you'll hear about. So.
Yes, I'm also from LTM, Heroin Awareness and Support Foundation, and one of the trends and the things that we have seen start the use of heroin is an athlete getting an injury and having a surgery like the nurse described, and it's being started through a prescription, whether a tooth is being pulled by their wisdom teeth or they had an injured back or an arm. So a lot of times the trend is targeted towards an athletic male. I mean, anybody is able to start a heroin addiction, but the common trends have been through prescription pain pills prescribed by doctors. And so that's something to really look out for and really monitor when your kid goes to the dentist and they just give them a prescription of Vicodin, to monitor that. Advil does a great job of lessening the pain, and to teach your kids that pain is part of life and to give them coping mechanisms on how to tolerate sad times, painful things, and things like a toothache. You are supposed to experience pain. So that's just a little added to how sometimes an addiction starts.
One other thing I'd like to add, and the coroner just brought up a great point. The Batavia Police Department recently, within the last year, has developed a program where old prescriptions that are in your home, and I want to say it's mostly just for Batavia residents at this point, but other communities, St. Charles and Geneva, I think are on board with this too. I can't say 100% that's the case, but Batavia does have a drop box where you can bring in old prescriptions that are in your medicine cases or boxes that you don't use anymore. That way that the kids, if they do think about doing this or somebody starts talking to them about trying to get any kind of medication, you can bring that down to the Batavia Police Department, no questions asked, drop that, and it'll be disposed of properly by the state. So we do have that option also that is open to the citizens.
Okay, I'd like to thank everyone, especially the panel, for coming tonight. This is such an important topic that we really just are trying to get the conversation started. So, at dinner time, talk about heroin. But thank you so much for coming. We know it's a busy night with the Bears game and everything. It was not part of my plan to interfere with the Bears game, but thank you so much for coming and give us some feedback.